Hello and welcome to IGN Overclocked, episode 25. I'm your host, Mitch Dyer, joined as always by Marty Sluva.
Hi, Mitch Dyer.
It's been a while.
I'm here often sometimes.
Welcome back.
Thanks, man.
Chloe Rad, welcome back as well.
Hello.
Hi, Chloe.
Glad to have
Hi.
you. Chloe's on the show this week. Marty's on the show this week. Dan is not. So we're going to talk about Dark Souls
Yay!
basically the whole time.
So we don't have to talk about XCOM? Is that what you're saying?
That's true.
the best.
We've been playing a lot of Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Chloe, you wrote a featurey editorial that I really
Yeah.
liked called Dark Souls 3 is the hardest Dark Souls
It
yet.
is.
And that sort of means something because you play a whole bunch of Dark Souls.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls.
Yeah.
And this one definitely is bringing me back to kind of like the first time I played Dark Souls 1, you know, that level of difficulty. And so I
Yeah.
talk a bit about it. I talk a bit about in my piece about how like Dark Souls 2 for me, the first time I played was like super easy and super disappointing. And like even Bloodborne, as tough as it was in its own like unique ways, was kind of toned down a little. It was a different kind of hard, you know?
Yeah.
Like the combat was a bit more aggressive and stuff. Like Dark Souls, the combat is much slower in terms of pacing and it's much heavier and stuff. It's a different kind of thing to get used to. But Dark Souls 3 is definitely the most like Dark Souls 1. And even Demon Souls, which was also very hard.
Yeah.
And so I'm super excited. Like it's not a bad thing at all. I'm not having a bad time.
Yeah. No, it's that satisfaction, the rewarding feeling of like, there are two skeletons. Literally, how do I do this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you get there are these areas in the game where it's like it's not really that large of an area, you know, and there aren't that many enemies, but they're hard. It's like you're chipping away at these relatively
Yeah.
you know.
One of the things I've noticed is that the enemies, I do completely agree that this, from what I've played, it's bringing me back to that Dark Souls 1 feeling of unfamiliarity.
Yeah.
And when you enter somewhere and you're like, I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing right now. Whereas I felt like Dark Souls 2, I had a sense of confidence throughout the whole thing that almost took a bit away from the experience. But one of the things with combat in Dark Souls and 3, which I totally agree, it goes back to a slower pace of traditional Dark Souls, but the enemies seem more aggressive and more sort of like ravenous.
They
and
hit harder too. It's like everything is so aggressive and scary in this game, and that's not just enemies either. Like the environment, everything feels so threatening. It's like,
and that sort of reminds me of Bloodborne in a way. Like the enemies have that thing where once like combat gets initiated, a lot of them do that like messed up transformation where like they'll sprout wings or a weird thing will come out
so
of
so
that.
terrifying.
Yeah. God, those things are scary.
Yeah, and they're like caged dogs. They're just
Everything
angry.
just screams at you.
It's terrifying for a couple reasons because one, it's like, oh, that's a spooky sudden thing that just happened, and it's different, but it's also a different kind of threat. You were currently fighting a guy that you knew exactly how to solve, and now you don't.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And that's terrifying in a Dark Souls game where you're like, oh, it's a puzzle and I've solved it, except you haven't.
Yeah, which same thing with bosses too. Bosses tend to. We were just fighting the Crystal Sage, which is this boss that sort of reminded me of like if Big Hat Logan from Dark Souls 1 became a fat bird that melted into the ground.
And mixed with Pinwheel.
And mixed with Pinwheel, because
like,
he's halfway through the fight, he multiplies.
Yeah.
And then there's like
Hit
there's
the right
sort
one.
of
He's
like
the Shredder.
yes, there's like shadow versions that will still throw magic at you, but with one hit they'll disappear. And so all of a sudden, this fight where you're like, oh, I know how to solve this thing, becomes like, oh god, this is unmanageable.
I've
and
actually
unwieldy.
noticed a couple of the fights so far in Dark Souls 3 are sort of like puzzles where you have to figure out what to do rather than just, you know, they're not just sponges, you know, damage sponges at all. Another thing that makes Dark Souls 3 really hard outside of combat is just the exploration, you know? Like, I think part of the reason why Dark Souls 2 was so easy was that the world felt very linear, you know?
Yeah.
You it was almost like a hallway simulator with nice backdrops.
Yeah, we talked about this very briefly. I can't remember if it was on a podcast or not, but the idea that it's, you know, Dark Souls 1 is very, very large, but it's not actually... It is, but it's also not a huge amount of space. It comes from depth and density.
The way it wraps around itself.
and like underneath and around and inside of itself,
Yeah.
right? Like you're going into tombs and you're going into places where you're like, oh, there's something in here.
Yeah.
And at first it's a room, but then you go down the stairs and you're like, there's a whole sewer system in here.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh
and then
my
and
God.
then you turn a corner and you're like, oh, I'm at the very beginning of the game
back,
all of a sudden.
yeah.
It's like it's this really well designed maze. And
Yes.
that is, in terms of level design, what Dark Souls 3
It's like a
goes
3D
back
Castlevania.
to.
I mean,
castle.
totally. That moment in Dark Souls 1 where you go from you find the elevator in the Undead Parish and you go back down to the Firelink
Yeah.
Shrine is, to me, like, that's the, like, Symphony of the Night or Super Metroid. We're like, oh, this whole thing is connected.
That's what kind of the game this is, yeah.
Whereas Dark Souls 2 didn't really hit, like, Dark Souls 2 was very much, like, certain
powered
roads, certain roads led back to Majula, but, like, overall, it felt like it was, like, these long spokes and levels felt almost interconnected or not interconnected in a way that you would, like, use a bonfire just to get somewhere.
Yeah, you just move from level to level, and that was kind of it. In Dark Souls 3, I'm totally feeling the pressure just in all aspects of the game. Combat, like trying to find my way around, like it's just beautiful.
Yeah, which is funny because all of it, like handful of us are playing in the office for review and for wikis and for features, and it's a lot of people who are seasoned, Bloodborne Souls players, and everyone is sort of the same mindset. Yeah. Like no one is like, oh, this is easy. Everyone's like, oh, geez, this is it.
Yeah.
The thing about it too is like I feel like the easy dismissive way to look at Dark Souls 3, especially in light of your article, like it's the hardest one yet. Everyone looks at it and is like, the game hates you and it doesn't want you to succeed.
No.
And I don't believe that. More than any game on the planet, I feel like this game respects the player.
Yeah.
And it respects the Dark Souls player because the first thing you do in this game is fight a boss. Like you walk through a couple guys, they're kind of just food to teach the new player. But if you've played a Souls game, you know that A, you can get a few souls off them, and B, you can just breeze past them. You don't need to care. And it's right into a boss fight. And it's kind of a hard one. Like, I've played a lot of Souls, and I still struggled on that first guy with the giant sword.
I mean, it's absolutely a tense boss fight right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And it's not one of those fake boss fights where it's like you're supposed to die, and then you're reborn somewhere. It's like, no, you got to beat this thing to move on.
Yeah, like you do not progress until you beat this really hard dude.
Yeah.
And it's a really good fight, too, because it's a really huge and heavy looking kind of knight dude, but he moves very fast.
Yeah.
And so it kind of introduces you to this idea of like, things are not going to be what they seem. Also, it transforms halfway through.
Yes.
Spoiler.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's also like
I love that they're doing the transformations like they did in Bloodborne.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. He's also a little bit deceptive in that, he winds up for that big wide strike. And then it's a few frames longer than you're expecting before he finally comes around.
Yeah.
And maybe you thought he was going to come from the right, but he actually sweeps from the left. And you're everything about this is surprising.
And some of his swings track you too, so if you try to dodge away. And I guess some people would call that unfair, right? But I think Dark Souls does a good job preparing you for what it is. It never lies about what the experience is going to be.
It's also the only game I can think of in recent memory where the bosses are not stupid. Like they're challenging because they adapt to you. They're aware of what you're doing. They kind of know what tricks you can do, and they improvise the same way you have to. Because you're as dangerous as every boss, obviously, because you're going to beat them. So they have to be ready for you too.
And as versatile as their movesets are, though, like they do have a set moveset, and so that's another thing. Is like you're not fighting this weird procedurally,
totally.
Like you have to memorize these things. Like it's possible. It's always possible, just with a little patience and dedication. And that's what I think makes Dark Souls hard for people is they don't want to dedicate the amount of time it takes to really be good at these games.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's sort of the advice I'm giving to people who are maybe have just played Bloodborne and are getting into Dark Souls 3 is that Bloodborne, you could be it was really about being aggressive and like getting up in an enemy's face and sort of like throwing caution to the wind and being a little reckless. Whereas this,
taking that last dive you shouldn't have just to get the kill.
You have to just to get your HP back.
Yeah, and that was totally a system in Bloodborne. Whereas this, like, no, you have to be calm and stay back and learn the patterns.
You have to take it slow. You cannot respond to getting hit or stunned by a big knight with a counterattack of your own.
Yes.
You have to just roll away and be like, okay, what opening does this guy have?
Yeah, and if it means waiting 15 seconds to get one or two strikes in, like you just got to do that.
Or circling around
just
for the
waiting
backstab.
to see exactly, or just waiting to see what they're capable of. And what their patterns are and what their tells are, and maybe you misread it or you try something and you're like, oh, okay, thought I knew that, but I don't.
Yeah, it is a different kind of pace to have to adapt to.
I love it, man.
But I love it. Yeah, it's great.
And the exploration, like I'm reading Derek Hughes' Spelunky book right now, and he talks a lot about like designing Spelunky around an adventure, like very similar to the original Zelda game, which you kind of arrive at this beach and you just go wherever you want to go, and there are caves you could explore, or there are big mountains you can find, and you just kind of come across them when you do, and the fact that they're there is exciting. That's the mystery, and a lot of modern Zelda games have kind of forgotten that, and they're very handholdy and they push you through a very specific set of things where yes, Dark Souls is kind of guided, but I feel like it represents that idea so much better than any Zelda game right now. It's so good about just saying, okay, here you are, you've arrived, go see what you can find. And you're going to find stuff that's going to blow my mind because I'm like, oh no, I didn't. I went totally the other way and found a set of stairs that took me here a lot faster. And you're going to be like, what? I didn't know that was
already
impossible.
The experience that we're having right now with all the various people who are playing in the office. Like everybody's gone down these different branching paths, found different bosses. Some people have found characters that for some reason aren't appearing for someone else.
Oh my God.
Yeah, really
That's
good.
so cool.
Yeah, it is just Dark Souls 1 again. And
and I mean, even tons of links to Dark Souls 1 too. Like stuff that you don't have to have played
Some
Dark
fire
Souls
links.
1. Yeah, some fire. I like that a lot. But just tons of characters where you're like, oh man, you are either exactly that character or you're mentioning that place that was in Dark Souls 1.
And it is funny that that's so surprising too, but I think because of Dark Souls 2, because of how loosely...
How disconnected
sort of
it
different
was.
it was, yeah.
Yeah, like this feels like kind of the true sequel that people wanted. And so...
Yeah.
Yay.
That's cool. So we're gonna have a ton of features and a full review leading up to its release on the 12th, correct? April 12th?
Well, it comes out April 12th.
Yeah, but it's already out in Japan.
Yeah,
it's already
came out in
Japan
Japan today.
So, but that just means we're going to have a bunch of coverage
We
leading
will
up
have
to
a
an
lot of
eventual
stuff.
review.
Yep.
That will be live before April 12th.
That's
Yes.
true.
Yes.
You just did a live stream today. That's
Yes.
going to be archived.
Yeah, it's archived.
What happened? Was some good stuff on that one? What did you see
Yeah,
today?
we tried to fight that Crystal Sage boss and died quite a few times. We found a secret boss that was actually one of the bosses that we played in a preview event.
Okay.
That
The
was
dancer?
the dancer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a weird thing you have to do to unlock that.
Yes, it was sort of a secret boss. We found a cool new version of the Asylum Demon. It was very
That's
hairy.
that's the
the
first guy you
stray
fought in
demon.
Dark
Very
Souls 1,
first
right?
guy in one.
Yeah.
Wow.
This one was
an
like gray
ashen
and hairy.
version,
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, some links to Dark Souls 1. We did it good. I was proud.
That's good.
And if you go to IGN right now and you search Dark Souls 3, there's a weird way you can play it right now on Xbox One. I hope that that's still the case when this podcast goes live. They might fix that.
Yeah.
But as far as we can tell, you can only do it on Xbox One. There's totally a way to circumvent a loophole on Xbox Live. So if that's where you're going to play Dark Souls, which it's only 30 frames on console and it's 60 on PC.
Yeah, 1080 60 on PC.
It is really pretty on
looks
PC.
So
great.
good in
It
60
looks
though,
so good.
right?
Yeah.
God. It really does make all the
Yeah,
difference.
and this is definitely they're not pulling one of those how the Dark Souls 1 PC version came out and was like super gimped
Oh,
and then
God,
the
no.
community. I mean, the community fixed it after like a day or two, but that always like left a bad taste in my mouth. No,
Yeah.
the PC version seems just fine, better
Yeah.
than just fine.
Weirdly,
The
I asked
best.
you about the archive and what you guys did. Video literally just went live. You got out of the stream 17 minutes ago, and stuff's already on IGN. Saboteur. Our video team is so good.
Yeah, I wish our editorial team was as good.
Wow. Nice call.
It's fine. I'm here. I make fun of myself.
That's true. Shall we move on? Should we talk about a different video game?
Guess so.
What?
Marty, you went to an Oculus event last week.
I did. Yeah.
And you and I played some Oculus games. Chloe, have you tinkered with this thing much yet? The Rift?
I've used it a couple times.
Okay.
Not recently though.
Okay.
So
Yeah. How are you? Are you like a fan
actually
of VR?
no, I did use it recently.
Okay.
During GDC, yeah. I
Nice.
played some kind of tank.
All right, so you're a
Game.
big liar, is what you're saying.
Why are you lying so much?
What? I've played a lot of VR. It's good.
Yeah, but it's just really interesting, right? Like, we've been talking about Vive so much on this show that to go take such a sharp left turn and be like, all right, let's just play Oculus all week. It was so different. Like, it was so weird to play a bunch of Oculus games at the same time as we were playing a bunch of Vive games, because it made me realize, like, oh, VR is not a unified thing. Like, these are very different platforms. Obviously, I knew that, but it takes playing a bunch of games in a row to kind of realize, like, the strengths and weaknesses that each have over each other.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sort of, I spent a bunch of time with all three, PSVR included, last week, and I'm sort of, like you said, noticing the strengths, the weaknesses, and then the eventual strengths of some. And speaking to Oculus directly, the one thing right out the gate it's missing from Vive is the sort of touch motion stuff, which Oculus Touch isn't being released until later on in 2016.
It's pretty late, too, right? Like, it's September, I want to say?
I don't know if it has an exact date, but I think it's
Are
just
those the controllers?
Yeah,
Yes,
so
the
those are
weird
the-
thumb things that, like, wrap
Yeah.
around your back.
Yeah, and those are the
so
things that
weird.
give you sort of the motion and mobility that the Vive has.
Yeah.
But that's not come when Oculus launches on the 28th. That's not really there, so you're not going to get those amazing experiences
That's
like
so weird.
Job Simulator and that kind of stuff off the gate. But some of the launch games that we did get to play are pretty cool. I got to play Chronos, which is probably something you'd be interested in. Which
I really want to play
Is that
Chronos.
the dungeon
Time
crawly
Dark Souls?
time thing?
Dungeon
Yeah.
Crawly, it definitely it controls very much like a light Souls game, like a simplified Souls game.
I'm curious, what is it like playing a third-person game in VR?
I was really skeptical on that. I was really like, what? Well, like first person just seems to make so much sense. Totally. But after playing Chronos and then Edge of Nowhere, which is Insomniac's game, which is sort of Dead Space 3-ish. It's like a horror game set in the Arctic. Yeah,
Canada.
It
That's
totally
like
works.
Cryostasis or
Yeah,
something?
100%. But it totally works. A third-person game where the VR-ness of it is sort of you being the camera totally works for me. It works in Chronos because everything is from these static camera angles that are sort of like the original Resident Evil, where you enter a room and the camera is just positioned at one part, and your neck sort of it would almost be like if literally a movie camera was positioned
like
somewhere
you
in a
described
room.
it, and I thought of a security camera.
Yeah, totally. And then your neck is the rest of the camera, and you can look down, you can look up, but you can't like move.
Is that jarring when it goes from one to the other?
Totally
it
not
seems
jarring.
like it would be massively disorienting.
It surprisingly wasn't. And there were some times where it's really effective, like depth of field, where I was in a cave and there was a bunch of stalagmites, the ones that come out of the ground, between me and the character, and it definitely had this awesome sense of depth and really felt like you're watching a really great 3D movie. There's other parts where the camera's sort of looking down like a really deep well, and you had that sense of, oh God, I'm gonna fall there even though I know I'm not. And so that was really cool. And same thing with Edge of Nowhere, where I'm climbing along these walls in an Arctic cave, and I look down, I'm like, oh God, that's really far down. So third person totally works, and it makes me like, I don't know, like I could see down the road them adding a VR thing into like a Souls game, or like, not that everything needs VR.
Well,
but
that's kind of what I was going to ask. Is like, you say it works, but does this game benefit from it? Does it need to be a VR game? Would you rather just not play it in VR, not have to buy the headset?
I mean, that's the weird thing now is like I play these games and I sort of think like, would the mechanics and systems be able to hold up in a thing like Chronos if you strip away the VR and you're just playing? Like, would I want to play a game if someone was like, hey, there's a game that's like Dark Souls but simplified and the camera is like Resident Evil 1? Wouldn't you just be like,
no thanks,
I don't want to play that?
But the fact that it's in VR, it's like, and it's a VR game, it's like, well, okay.
Yeah.
It seems like a weird gimmick.
Yeah, do you think that's just the grab?
It's almost like I don't know. It's almost like a weird thing where it's like, oh, well, it's in VR and I need something to play in VR, so I guess I'll play that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't have the same like, whereas something like the Portal and Dota demos that we've talked about at length on here, like those would just simply not be as effective if not in VR.
Totally.
Like
because you are present in that space.
And the
100%.
power comes from the sense of space and the sense of size and sort of the actual futzing around with the environment.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. That's going to be something, leading up to the 28th when there's certain games that are going to be on both, like Adrift.
Yes.
We're going to review Adrift normally and Adrift in VR and see sort of what the difference between those are. And
yeah, that's going to be fascinating to see how a lot of game sites cover this stuff. Yeah. Especially like, so there are 30 launch games is the number that Oculus is throwing around, and there's stuff like Adrift, Eve, Valkyrie, Eve Gunjack, Air Mech, Defense Grid 2, Chronos, which we talked about, Project Cars, Adventure Time, Lucky's Tale, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, a bunch more.
Ethan Carter,
really
yes.
Yeah.
So it's a bunch of stuff, and some of them are re-releases. It's funny. It's like, okay, these are 30 games, and each of them are between $10 and $60. Now that $600 VR price tag is like going way high up. I wonder too, is like, if I own Ethan Carter, do I get it free for VR? Like, how does that work?
I don't know. That's actually a really good question. Yeah, like I don't know. I have Ethan Carter on my Steam account, and because I reviewed it, like, am I going to be able to hook up an Oculus and it's just mine?
Yeah, or do I need to buy it on the Oculus store?
That's probably the one I want to play Ethan Carter the most right now, because that's the one I'm most familiar with.
It's also
I played through it twice.
So beautiful that I want to see that from that perspective.
Totally, yeah. And so I want to play that and be like, is this any better because of VR? Does this add anything to a game I already really liked?
Yeah. So to your point about the conversation we had about Chronos and whether or not it's a viable game on its own or if it's just a cool novelty VR thing, 30 launch games on day one for Oculus is pretty good. And there's obviously going to be some stuff that doesn't land and isn't necessarily as impressive or a killer app kind of thing, but that's a lot of games. There's a lot of really cool stuff. There's a lot of really great stuff coming. You mentioned Edge of Nowhere, which is awesome. We played Werewolves Within from Ubisoft, which is great.
Which is a ton of fun. Eagle Flight, also from Ubisoft, is a ton of fun. Like we have a little bit of a we sort of have a glimpse of what the rest of the year is like. Some of the games at the Oculus event I went to last week were there, but we still don't we have a very firm grasp on what is coming out on March 28th. And it's a huge, really varied lineup. 30 games is probably bigger than most lineups. I think that's probably bigger than the PS4 and Xbox One launches were. That said, none of the games as of right now particularly stand out to me as, I don't know, maybe we're just not at a time where a launch killer app exists anymore. Like, this isn't Mario 6. I think days of Mario 64 and Halo might be behind us, honestly. Like,
totally.
There was no
big thing that sells the thing.
Yeah, like
now it might be quantity is enough.
Totally. Like when Xbox One and PS4 launched, like the big games were like Knack and Rise. Like, those are
I think that's just because VR is so new.
Yeah.
Like I'm really curious. Like going back sort of to the third person thing, but also tying into this, like, I'm really curious to see what kinds of games people make later down the line when VR is more established, when people are more like aware of the unique constraints and strengths of VR, and then designing experiences specifically for that. I feel like using a third person camera is kind of a weird approach, honestly, for VR. I don't know if it's like completely taking advantage fully of what it's capable of.
Yeah, that's a good
unless, at least the way it's implemented here, maybe somebody can find some kind of interesting use for it. But I don't know. I mean, I would have to play these games for myself, of course, but this is just, it'll be cool to see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like third person is a much tougher sell than first person, because VR and first person just is the thing that pops up in everyone's mind. Like, I put this helmet on and I'm looking through someone's eyes.
I feel like for me, like, Adrift is kind of what's those are the sorts of experience that are selling VR for me,
Yeah.
TBD if it works or if it's great, but like that idea is so seductive to me in VR.
Of like stuff like Firewatch and Tacoma and first person games that aren't necessarily like, I don't know if a Call of Duty would work in first person. Like, I don't know if a Battlefield would work in first person, or not first person, but in VR.
Well, like, I think a war game would be really traumatic.
Yeah.
Well, also a game where you're dying a lot is really frustrating in that, like, you don't want that experience of, I don't know. I don't want failure in VR. Like, I don't want that feeling.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I never thought about that before this moment.
I think it could be designed well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would take. I definitely don't think it can't be done. Jesus Christ, what was that sentence? I definitely think it's possible, but I don't think.
Much better.
I don't think just being like Modern Warfare 4.
Are you shutting down?
I was talking for 2 hours. I didn't get a drink of water. My mouth's all dry.
Want this guy? You want this?
I don't think you could just say like, hey, the next Call of Duty game is VR, and we don't have to change any design mentalities.
Just the conventional FPS format or whatever might not. But yeah, like, it'll be cool to see how people adapt existing formats to VR.
Yeah, totally. Like, I played Bulletstorm at DICE, which is an epic VR.
You played Bullet
Train. Bulletstorm is
totally
by
epic
the guys who did.
It's also epic, but
and it was the guys who did Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And Gears Judgment.
Where am I? And so I played Bullet Train, which is a first-person shooter, but the way it handles movement, it's not a first-person shooter where you're just using an analog stick to move around or using WASD. You sort of just have specific nodes in the level, and it acts like almost like a arcade light gun game. And that's how you control movement. Sort of, is it the same way with Budget Cuts?
Well, Budget Cuts is more freeform because you can bounce to anywhere, but it's the same idea where you're like, I want to point there and I'm there. I want to point over there and I'm there.
So I think like those are smart ways to be like, hey, this is how we adapt a genre that everyone understands into VR.
It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot interesting. It's going to be really interesting just to see how developers evolve that and improve that over time too. Like, it's a really great first step. I don't know if that's the solution, but it's super cool right now. And navigation and traversal and stuff is going to be cool to see like how that changes over the next year, 2 years, 5 years.
It's nuts that this thing's going to be out in the market within a week, and we're just there. We just did it. VR's here.
Yeah. Good job, everyone. Welcome to the future.
Yay.
All right, we should get out of here. What's everyone working on? What should we promote? What's cool? What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? You're going to be
difficult.
You're living in
Marty's dying. I'm playing Dark Souls.
Chloe, you're _Chloe on Twitter.
Yes, _Chloe.
And you're working on Dark Souls stuff right now, including our review.
Yes.
Good luck. I do not envy you. It's going to be goodbye to your evenings and weekends and
see you guys
free time
next week.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anything else you're working on, or is it just Dark Souls?
That's mostly it. I might review another game that maybe we'll talk about on a later podcast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Also, go read Chloe's Go read Chloe's feature on Dark Souls 3 is the hardest one yet, and your 1979 Revolution preview is really cool.
Yeah, that's another game I played at GDC that I'm actually really excited about. Been following that game for a while. It is by Naveed Kansari. He worked at Remedy and Rockstar on games like Max Payne, Homefront, Alan Wake, and so he's making a game about the Iranian Revolution. It's sort of like a Telltale style choose your own adventure game. It looks really cool. It's really important to me personally because of just cultural stuff.
We're going to talk more about nonfiction games soon because you brought that up today, and I think that's a great idea.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Marvin, what are you doing?
I don't know. I didn't see how you. No, I'm at McBiggity, 2 G's and 2 T's. I'm planning PAX East. We're going to have a whole bunch of stuff at PAX East in 4 weeks or so. So we'll have more on sort of meet and greet and panel stuff soon. But if you see me there, say hi. Be nice. Tell nice. Give me a hug because I'll be missing Mitch. And Mitch, what are you doing?
That's true. I'm at MitchD on Twitter, and
you're at Quitters Incorporated.
I'm at Quitters Incorporated. April 1st is my last day at IGN. I don't know if this is my last podcast or not. I don't know if this is my last Overclocked or not. So next week I'll be at Build. I'll be at the Build conference that Microsoft is doing. It'll be me and Jose. So we're gonna go there, where there's gonna be all sorts of who knows what for the future of PC gaming at Microsoft. So I'll be there. Whether or not I'm back to record about that, I don't know.
Wait, when are you going to be there? When are you going to be back in the office? Can't we just shift days?
The event is Wednesday. Yeah, we could probably just shift recording for the
Well, let's just shift. Yeah, we'll just do that.
You know what? This is my show. I'll decide what's what. Dan's not here to make the call. That quitter. He came to me 20 minutes ago and was like, you know what? I can't make it. And I was like, all right.
You came to us earlier this week and you literally said I'm never making it again.
It's true.
Yeah, that was real talk. But yeah, no, well, whatever. We'll make it work
we'll be back next week. There's Build should be interesting. Like last year, they showed off all the Crackdown tech.
Oh, that's what that was.
Yeah, it's like that's where Microsoft goes to be like, here's the future of technology, and you're like, all right, that's never gonna happen. And then
maybe see some HoloLens.
Maybe. Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
I hope I get to play with it because it was not good at E3 when I used it. And it's really cool though. Like the promise of AR is so cool. That device is just weird, and the field of view is not great. Whatever. Room for improvement. I'm sure they're going to improve it. That device will be amazing. Hopefully, more to report next week. This has been IGN Overclocked, episode 25. Chloe, Marty, thank you so much. I hope to have you both next week.
Bye, Mitch.
Talk more Build.
We'll do that.